Today we're going to demonstrate an exercise that doesn't have a lot of direct application. Unless you're a fighter or a thrower, it has some direct application. But for powerlifting and bodybuilding, not a direct application, but some indirect applications. We're going to try to train the muscle that lies underneath the pec major. We're going to try to train today the pec minor muscle. And it originates on some of the ribs here, and it goes up from the ribs underneath the pec, and it hooks onto the scapula on the coracoid process. And what it does is, when it contracts, it pulls the scapula forward. So pull your scapula back and pinch your shoulders together. And this is good bench press technique right here. We want to pinch our shoulders together, and we want to keep them there in a bench press. But to get the idea of supporting both sides, so to support a joint, you need strength on both sides of it. You need strength back here and back, and also in front. Back here, we're going to be pinching our shoulder blades together all the time when we bench. And people feel that. They talk about their back and, their traps and things squeezing. And that muscle has to hold the scapula back during the stroke of the bench press. But if there's nothing to freeze the other side, then we're only training one side of the joint. And that's like training biceps and never triceps, or vice versa, or quads and never hamstrings. We don't want to create a strength imbalance on each side of the joint. So the pecs do a lot of balancing here, but they don't directly work with the scapula. The pecs go to the humerus. But the pec minor, when I say pecs, I should say the pec major does not deal with the scapula. It goes from the sternum up to the humerus. But the pec minor, underneath the pec major, it does stabilize the scapula. And what it does is it pulls it forward. So pinch back like in a good bench press technique, and then put your arms out. And like in a shitty bench press or bad bench press technique, what we're going to do is we're going to pull the scapula forward. And you would never want to do this bench pressing, but we're going to do it today specifically back and forth like this. Protraction, retraction. The serratus are involved here too, but we want to focus on what's directly beneath the chest, which is more chest. It's pec minor in this case. Pull the shoulder blades forward, pull the shoulder blades back. And that's basically the motion right there. Again, we want to, so this has indirect effect for every sport in stabilizing the shoulder girdle without stabilizing the humerus. Just fixing the shoulder still so that the humerus can do things. And it has direct application in throwing a punch. You don't want to punch and stop here. You want to throw a punch and then extend that shoulder forward into the punch. So there's direct applications in sports. Indirectly for powerlifting and for bodybuilding, the indirect application is if I make the muscle underneath the pecs bigger, it pushes the pecs out further. So mass, just pure mass. That mass also for powerlifting, just size, mass, muscle, meat, has a stabilizing effect as well. So I can't say that we should put this into a regular program, but I think it's a good thing to put into an off-season program. It's a good exercise to be doing when you're not supposed to be training the muscles you always train. It's a muscle that you don't always train and doesn't get a lot of attention and certainly doesn't get this kind of isolation. And it has something that will feed back into when you go to bench press and you want to freeze your position. You want to be stable on the bench press. The pec minor might help you do that by freezing the scapula front and back. The back is taken care of by the rhomboids and the traps, but the front, what holds that there? Well, this is a good muscle to train for that. So that's enough about why you might want to do it or why you might not want to do it. But let me show you how we can get to it if we want to. So I'm going to have David lay back on his bench, and we're going to create a situation where we don't get any involvement from the anterior deltoid. So we don't want the humerus to move because of the deltoid. We want the humerus to move because let me do it on the other side here, Dave. I think they can see in the backward. We want the humerus to move because the scapula is pushing it up. So if you can look back in the mirror, I hope you can see. We don't want the humerus to move because it's being pulled up because of the deltoid. We want it to be pulled up by the muscle underneath. And so if I pull on the scapula underneath, the scapula forces the joint forward. So to get the delts and the pec the pec major out of it, we're going to keep a vertical grip. If this column of bone is out wider, then we can get some involvement that we might not want from the pecs and from the pec major and the deltoid. So what he's going to do is he's going to take the weight out. He's going to let it sink back on his shoulders. Just let it relax. And he's going to keep the elbow nice and straight. And he's just going to push the bar as far away from it as he can. And by lifting that, the pecs aren't too activated, but what's under the pecs are, and then let it sink back down. And maybe again, if you can watch in the mirror back there, you see the shoulder joint is moving, not because the humerus is moving, but because the scapula is being protracted and then it's allowed to retract. And the muscles that do a lot of this are going to be the muscle that gets the big job of doing this is the pec minor. And there's other ones too. But this is a really good way to isolate this exercise, this muscle, and exercise it and not get a lot of exercise in the other muscles. David, let's put it back in the rack for a second. And let's see what happens when you take a little wider grip. So it's a narrow grip, but it's not as narrow as vertical. Let's see what happens. See if you can feel your pecs and your shoulders doing some of the work. Now push the bar further away from you. And maybe you can feel some anterior delt and maybe some pec.
I feel more in my shoulders.
Okay, yeah. So you could do it this way as well, but you wouldn't be truly isolating the muscle we want to isolate.
Yeah,
and the wider this goes, and go ahead and walk it out a little bit, David. Walk your grip out. And the wider you go, the more these superficial muscles we're going to see come into play as opposed to that deep muscle that we want to get at. You feel it even more in now walk it back in so that things are straight up and down in relation to gravity. You're creating a column of bone. It doesn't move anywhere. And now lift the bar as far away from you as you can. The only thing that can do this is by moving the scapula.
Yeah.
And when he moves that scapula, the muscle that's going to be really involved in doing that is going to be the pec minor. It's great, David. That's fine. Rack it up. So again, this is a fringe exercise, but it's a fun exercise, and it can get you in touch with moving that shoulder blade back and forth so that when you want to pin yourself into bench press and keep yourself pinned, you're familiar with what it's like to have the shoulder forward and back, shoulder forward and back. Getting familiar with it is probably worth doing it a little bit. Just getting familiar with how that shoulder and scapula work together. And then, I mentioned earlier, I won't be redundant, there's a good reason to do this in the off season, because what else are you going to do in the off season? In the off season, what most people do is they do the same exercises light, and that's not really resting them. You want to rest them. You want to give them a rest. So you can get in the gym and do other exercises that you are not familiar with to create some sort of support system for the big muscles that you train all the time. And I think that's worth doing, and it's worth checking out, and it's worth trying, and see where you go with it. Thanks for listening.